Varda Elentári was the most powerful of the queens of the Valar and the creator of the stars themselves. Her origins stretch back before the creation of Arda, when she dwelt with Ilúvatar in the Timeless Halls alongside the other Ainur. During the great music that shaped reality, Varda's themes wove light itself into existence, establishing her dominion over all radiance in the universe. When she descended into Ea with the other Valar, she took physical form as a being of overwhelming beauty whose face radiated light too brilliant for any mortal or even most immortals to behold directly. In the earliest days before the awakening of the elves, Varda undertook her greatest work by kindling the stars from the dews of Telperion, creating countless points of light including Carnil, Luanil, Nennar, Lumbar, Alcarinco, and Elamire. She gathered the ancient light that Melkor had dispersed and formed new constellations specifically to herald the coming of the Firstborn, including Menelmacar with his shining belt, later called Orion, and Velasirka, the sickle of the Valar that stood as a sign of doom for Morgoth in the north. The elves called her Elbereth Gilthaniel, Star-Kindler, and loved her above all the Valar because she had prepared the skies for their awakening. Her power extended far beyond mere creation of celestial bodies, as she possessed the ability to hear any cry for aid spoken in Middle-earth, especially those uttered in darkness or despair. The light she placed in Arendil's Silmaril became the Evening Star, the most beloved star of the elves, and her name alone carried such power that servants of darkness could not endure its utterance. When Sam invoked her name in Cirith Ungol, the very mention of Elbereth caused the Watcher's will to break and their forms to crumble. Orcs fled in terror when elves sang hymns to Varda, and even Shelob retreated from the light of Arendil's star captured in Galadriel's phial. She resided on Tana Ketil, the highest mountain in all Arda, alongside her spouse Manwë, and from their halls of Ilmarin she could perceive everything that occurred in the world below. Her throne beside Manwë allowed them to see further than any other beings in existence when their powers combined. The light that emanated from her face was said to be the light of Ilúvatar himself, making her not just powerful but a direct conduit of the Creator's own radiance into the world. Before the creation of the sun and moon, Varda's stars were the only light in Middle-earth, making her directly responsible for enabling the awakening of the elves at Cuiviénen. The hallowing she placed upon the Silmarils made them burn any evil flesh that touched them, demonstrating her ability to imbue objects with divine properties that endured forever. Her rejection of Melkor before the creation of Arda, when he sought her in marriage, marked the beginning of his special hatred for her above all other Valar. The lamps of the Valar, Ilwin and Ormel, which first lit the world, contained light that Varda had gathered and refined from the cosmic void. When creating stars, she didn't simply place lights in the sky, but wove them into patterns that told stories and prophecies, encoding messages that only the wise could fully interpret across ages. Manwë Súlimo was the elder king of Arda and the mightiest of all the Valar in authority, though not in raw strength. He was the brother of Melkor and Ilúvatar's thought, created to be his equal in power but opposite in nature, choosing harmony where Melkor chose discord. As the appointed vice-regent of Ilúvatar, Manwë held absolute authority over all of Arda, commanding not just the Valar but having dominion over every living thing that drew breath. His sphere of influence encompassed the wind and air, from the smallest breeze to the mightiest tempest, and through the winds he could perceive and influence events anywhere in Arda simultaneously. The great eagles, including Thorondor with his wingspan of 180 feet, served as his personal messengers and were created by him before the awakening of the children of Ilúvatar. During the War of Wrath, Manwë commanded the host of Valinor, the most powerful military force ever assembled, consisting of Maiar, Vanyar elves, and beings of such might that their march shattered Beleriand and reshaped the entire western coast of Middle-earth. His judgments were final and absolute, demonstrated when he cast Melkor into the void, a feat requiring not physical strength but authority over the very fabric of reality itself. Unlike other Valar who might act independently, Manwë maintained constant communion with Ilúvatar, making him the only being in Arda who could claim to know the Creator's will directly. When he sat upon his throne on Tanaquetil with Varda beside him, their combined sight could pierce through all shadows and veils, seeing into the hearts of all beings and across all the spheres of the world. He commanded the allegiance of all good spirits and could summon the powers of all the Valar united, when necessity demanded, as he did when pronouncing the doom of Mandos or preparing for the final assault on Angband. His breath itself was the source of all life-giving airs in Arda, and his voice speaking in wrath could crack mountains and split the foundations of the earth. Even Melkor, at the height of his power, feared direct confrontation with Manwë when the Elder King's full authority was roused. Yet despite this overwhelming might, Manwë deliberately chose to rule through wisdom and mercy rather than force, intervening directly only when the balance of the world itself was threatened. The sapphire scepter of Manwë was said to be carved from a fragment of Ilúvatar's throne itself, granting him the authority to speak binding judgments that reality itself would enforce. His understanding of the music of the Ainur was more complete than any save, perhaps Ilúvatar, allowing him to perceive how current events connected to the grand themes that shaped existence. When he released Melkor from his 3 ages of imprisonment, it wasn't naivety, but rather adherence to a divine plan he perceived but could not fully alter. The eagles he created weren't merely servants but extensions of his will, their eyes serving as his throughout Middle-earth, which is why Gwaihir could arrive precisely when needed during crucial moments. During the drowning of Númenor, Manwë's sorrow was so great that storms raged across all of Arda for 7 days, demonstrating how his emotions could affect the physical world. Ulmo, Lord of Waters, was unique among the Valar as he dwelt alone and seldom came to the councils in Valinor, preferring the depths of the seas to the halls of Manwë. His power flowed through every drop of water in Arda, from the smallest mountain spring to the vast deeps of Beligare, making him omnipresent in a way that even other Valar were not. Before the creation of Arda, Ulmo's themes in the great music were the most profound and beautiful, weaving together the sounds of all waters that would ever be, and even Melkor's discord could not wholly mar their beauty, but instead increase their sorrow and depth. He moved through Middle-earth constantly via its rivers and streams, maintaining awareness of all events through the waters that touched every land, which is why he knew of the sufferings of elves and men when other Valar remained unaware in their bliss in Valinor. His horn, the Ulamuri, created from white shells by the Maiar Salmar, produced music that once heard could never be forgotten, instilling an unquenchable longing for the sea in any who heard it. During the flight of the Noldor, Ulmo directly intervened more than any other Valar, appearing to Turgon and Finrod in dreams to guide them to establish Gondolin and Nargothrond, the hidden realms that would shelter the free peoples for centuries. He raised Tuor as his specific instrument, appearing to him directly at Viniamar in a form so terrible and magnificent that Tuor fell to his face, making Ulmo one of the only Valar to manifest in full glory to a mortal man. The Lord of Waters possessed the power to alter coastlines, as he did when helping to hide Gondolin by shrouding the veil in mists and shadows that confounded even the spies of Morgoth. His protection over Elwing when she cast herself into the sea demonstrated his ability to transform mortals, changing her into a seabird to carry the Silmaril to Ezerindil. Unlike Manwë, who acted through authority and law, Ulmo operated through inspiration and dreams, planting visions in the minds of the children of Ilúvatar that would manifest years or decades later. The music of water itself carried his messages, which is why the fountains of Gondolin and streams of Doriath could convey warnings and wisdom to those who knew how to listen. Even in the depths of Autumno and later Angband, water that seeped through rock and stone carried Ulmo's power, allowing him alone among the Valar to contest Melkor's dominion in his own fortresses. Ungoliant was a primordial entity of darkness, whose origins remained unknown even to the Valar, though she took the form of a monstrous spider of ever-changing size. Some claimed she arose from the darkness itself that lay about Arda, others that she was a corrupted Maya who had entered the void and become something far worse, but none knew the truth. Her power was unique in all of Arda, as she could devour light itself, creating a darkness that was not merely the absence of light, but an active, hungry void that consumed elimination. When she drank the light of the 2 trees of Valinor with Melkor, she grew to such hideous size and power that even Morgoth, the mightiest of all created beings, feared her and could not command her. The unlight she wove from her body was described as darkness visible, creating webs that could trap not just physical beings but light and hope themselves, forming barriers that even the Valar struggled to penetrate. After draining the 2 trees, she demanded the Silmarils from Morgoth, and when he refused, she bound him in her webs, and the Dark Lord who had defied all the Valar united was helpless before her hunger. Only the arrival of the Balrogs, summoned by Morgoth's desperate cry that echoed across all Beleriand, saved him from being devoured entirely. She bred with the great spiders of the Mountains of Terror and produced offspring that would plague Middle-earth for ages, passing on her ability to weave darkness and corrupt light to lesser degrees. Her hunger was infinite and could never be satisfied, driving her to eventually devour herself in the wastes of the south, though some claimed she endured in the forgotten places of the world where light had never touched. The terror she inspired was so profound that even millennia later, her last known spawn, Shelob, was called the last child of Ungoliant, to trouble the unhappy world, suggesting her evil transcended normal physical destruction. During her assault on the 2 trees, she moved faster than thought despite her enormous bulk, and her webs were strong enough to hold beings of Maya-level power indefinitely. The Valar themselves avoided direct confrontation with her after she fled Valinor, suggesting that even they were uncertain of victory against a creature that existed outside the normal order of creation. The poison she injected into the two trees wasn't merely destructive but corrupting, tainting the very essence of light so that not even Yavanna could heal them completely. Her ability to multiply herself through spawning created a network of lesser darknesses across Middle-earth, each spider carrying a fragment of her primordial hunger. The Girdle of Melian, one of the strongest protective enchantments ever woven, was specifically reinforced against the spider creatures of the Mountains of Terror, showing how deeply the Maiar feared Ungoliant's offspring. When she consumed gems and crystals, she didn't just destroy them, but unmade their light retroactively, erasing the memory of their brilliance from the world. Her webs could entangle not just physical beings, but concepts themselves, which is why those caught in her snares often forgot hope, love, and even their own names. The true horror of Ungoliant lay not in her physical form, but in what she represented, being a manifestation of the primordial void that existed before creation, the absence that preceded existence itself. Her ability to grow from consumption was limitless, and had she devoured the Silmarils, some believe she would have grown large enough to swallow Arda entirely, becoming a black hole of spiritual emptiness. The darkness she created was described as having weight and substance, pressing down on those within it like deep ocean water, making breathing difficult and movement sluggish. Her offspring inherited diluted versions of her powers, with each generation growing weaker, yet even the smallest spiders of Mirkwood carried enough of her essence to inspire instinctive terror in all living things. The regions where she passed during her flight from Valinor remained corrupted for ages, with the land itself remembering her presence and rejecting any attempt at healing or cultivation. Her hunger wasn't merely physical, but existential, seeking to devour not just matter but meaning itself, which is why Morgoth feared her despite his own immense power. The void she left in the world after consuming the light of the two trees could never be completely filled, creating a permanent scar in the fabric of reality that made the recreation of their light impossible. During her confrontation with Morgoth over the Silmarils, the Balrogs' whips of flame barely drove her back, and some accounts suggest she allowed herself to be driven off rather than being truly defeated. The sound of her feeding was described as the opposite of music, an anti-harmony that undid the themes of creation wherever it was heard. Her ability to spawn without a mate suggested she could reproduce through division, each offspring being a smaller fragment of her original essence, explaining why her children, while terrible, never matched her power. Shelob was the last great spawn of Ungoliant to plague Middle-earth, dwelling in the tunnels of Cirith Ungol for thousands of years before the War of the Ring. She inherited her mother's ability to weave darkness into physical form, creating tunnels of shadow that light could barely penetrate, though she lacked Ungoliant's power to devour light entirely. Her body had grown vast over the millennia, with a bloated bag of a belly and legs with knobbed joints that rose high above her back, each leg ending in a claw that could pierce steel. Unlike common spiders that fed on blood, Shelob feasted on the flesh and life force of her victims, preferring the blood of elves and men but consuming orcs when nothing else was available. She had made a pact with Sauron himself, or rather existed in an understanding where he provided her with prey through his fortress of Cirith Ungol, and she guarded the secret stair, though she served no one and acknowledged no master. Her intelligence far exceeded that of a mere beast, as she could remember events from thousands of years past and held grudges against entire bloodlines, particularly the line of Elendil. The darkness she exuded was not merely physical but spiritual, inducing despair and madness in those who entered her tunnels, causing even hardened warriors to lose their way and surrender to fear. Her hide was harder than horn or scale, impervious to normal weapons, and even Sting, a blade of Gondolin make, could barely pierce her skin when wielded with desperate strength. She possessed multiple eyes that could see in absolute darkness, but they were also her weakness, being the only truly vulnerable part of her body. When she battled Sam Gamgee, she had never known defeat in thousands of years of existence, having devoured countless warriors, including orcs, men, and elves who attempted to pass through her domain. Her venom could paralyze victims while keeping them alive for days or weeks, preserving them fresh for her feeding. The mere rumor of her presence was enough to deter entire armies from attempting to use the pass of Cirith Ungol, making her more effective than 1,000 orc guards. Her offspring spread throughout the dark places of Middle-earth, though none achieved her size or power, being mere shadows of Ungoliant's original darkness. Smaug the Terrible was the last and greatest of the fire drakes of the north to survive into the Third Age, claiming the title of the chiefest and greatest of calamities. He emerged from the Grey Mountains in TA 2770 and descended upon Erebor with such fury that the mountainside itself cracked and split from the heat of his coming. His body stretched nearly 150 feet in length, covered in scales like overlapping steel plates that no normal weapon could pierce, with only his belly showing any vulnerability where he had pressed gems and gold into his flesh over centuries of sleeping on treasure. The fire he breathed was not ordinary flame, but dragon fire of such intensity that it could melt the rings of power themselves, save only the one ring, and reduce entire cities to ash and slag in minutes. His intelligence matched his physical might, possessing knowledge accumulated over centuries and the ability to cast hypnotic spells with his voice and gaze, bending weaker minds to his will or freezing them in terror. When he took Erebor, he slaughtered thousands of dwarves and men in a single day, destroying the entire kingdom of Dale as an afterthought, demonstrating that entire civilizations were merely inconveniences to him. His senses were so acute that he could detect the removal of a single golden cup from his vast hoard while sleeping, and could smell the difference between dwarf, man, and hobbit from the faintest trace of scent. The desolation he created around the Lonely Mountain persisted for nearly 2 centuries, with the land remaining barren and poisoned by his mere presence, earning the region the name Desolation of Smaug. He possessed the dragon spell, an enchantment that grew stronger with age, allowing him to bewitch those who looked upon him or heard his voice, making them reveal their deepest secrets or become paralyzed with dragon fear. His wings could create winds strong enough to topple buildings when he flew, and his tail was a weapon in itself, capable of smashing through stone walls and crushing dozens of warriors in a single sweep. During his attack on Lake Town, he demonstrated tactical brilliance by setting the lake itself on fire, using the wooden buildings and docks as fuel to create an inescapable inferno. Even in death, his blood was poisonous, and his bones were prized for their magical properties, while his hoard carried a curse that brought madness and greed to those who claimed it. The wealth Smaug accumulated wasn't random but carefully selected, as he could sense the history and power in objects, keeping items of significance while discarding others, regardless of monetary value. His knowledge encompassed ancient history, languages, and riddles, having learned much during his centuries of life, and from the treasures he studied in his hoard. The heat of his body was so intense that he left molten footprints in stone, and the air around him shimmered like a desert mirage even when he was at rest. His voice carried a hypnotic quality that grew stronger the longer one listened, which is why Bilbo's conversations with him became increasingly dangerous as they progressed. The dragon sickness that affected those who coveted his treasure was partially caused by microscopic scales he shed, which carried a psychic poison that amplified greed and paranoia. Glaurung the Golden was the first of the fire drakes and the father of all dragons, bred by Morgoth in the depths of Angband through dark sorcery and corruption. Unlike his offspring who developed naturally, Glaurung was personally shaped by Morgoth's will, making him not just a beast but a conscious weapon of malice with intelligence that rivaled the wisest of elves. He emerged prematurely from Angband in his youth and was driven back by mounted archers, teaching Morgoth to keep him hidden until he reached full size and power. By the time of his maturity, Glaurung had grown to such might that he led the vanguard in the Battle of Sudden Flame, breaking the siege of Angband single-handedly by creating a river of fire that consumed everything in its path. His power over minds exceeded even Smaug's, as demonstrated when he held Turin and Nienor in his spell, erasing memories, implanting false thoughts, and weaving destinies of tragedy that would unfold exactly as he foresaw. The title Father of Dragons was not merely genealogical but magical, as Glaurung possessed abilities that later dragons lost, including the power to take on different forms and to project his consciousness across vast distances. During the sack of Nargothrond, he paralyzed Turin with nothing but his gaze and words, forcing him to watch as Finduilas was dragged away to torment, demonstrating cruelty that was calculated and personal rather than bestial. His eyes were described as windows into the void itself, containing not just malice but the active will of Morgoth, making those who looked into them see their own doom reflected back. He could not be harmed by any weapon while conscious, as his will alone could turn aside blades and arrows, requiring either stealth or overwhelming force to wound him. When he crossed Beleriand, he left trenches in the earth that became permanent geographical features, and his breath poisoned rivers so thoroughly that they remained toxic for decades. His death came only through Turin's black sword Gurthang, forged from meteoric iron, striking from beneath while Glaurung crossed the ravines of Capan. Glaurung's creation involved the corruption of sacred fire itself, as Morgoth perverted the flame imperishable that Ilúvatar alone possessed, creating instead a consuming hunger that destroyed rather than created. His growth was accelerated through feeding on the life force of captured elves, each consumed soul adding to his size and malevolence, which explained his unusual intelligence and ability to understand the deepest fears of the Firstborn. The dragon's body was a fortress unto itself, with scales that weren't merely armor but active defenses that could sense approaching threats and shift to deflect blows before they landed. His blood was liquid flame that burned hotter than any forge, capable of melting through stone and metal alike. making even wounding him dangerous to attackers. During the destruction of Beleriand, Glaurung demonstrated the ability to command lesser dragons through thought alone, coordinating attacks across hundreds of miles as if the entire dragon host shared a single mind. The curse he laid upon Turin wasn't simple magic, but a manipulation of fate itself, twisting the threads of destiny that the Valar had woven, showing his power extended into metaphysical realms. His presence alone could wither plant life for miles around, not through heat, but through a spiritual poison that drained the will to live from all growing things. The bridge at Nargothrond that he used as his bed became fused into a single piece of stone from the heat and pressure of his body, creating an inadvertent monument to his power that lasted long after his death. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the mind, making it impossible to ignore or misunderstand his words, regardless of language barriers. The treasure hoard he gathered at Nargothrond was arranged in specific patterns that amplified his power, using the golden gems as a magical battery that made him stronger the longer he remained there. Gothmog was the High Captain of Angband and Lord of the Balrogs, the most powerful of Morgoth's servants after Sauron himself. As a Maya who had been corrupted in the beginning of days, Gothmog possessed power that exceeded any earthly creature, wielding weapons of flame and shadow that could cleave through enchanted armor and shields. He personally slew Fëanor, the mightiest of all elves, surrounding him with other Balrogs and dealing the mortal wounds that even the creator of the Silmarils could not withstand. During the Nirnaeth Arnoediad, the Battle of Unnumbered Tears, Gothmog led the host of Angband and personally killed Fingon, High King of the Noldor, first binding him with his whip of flame, then crushing him beneath his black axe. His tactical brilliance matched his physical might as he commanded not just Balrogs but dragons, armies of orcs, and other creatures of darkness with strategic genius that turned potential defeats into crushing victories. The fear he inspired was so great that entire battalions of elves and men would break and flee at the sight of him approaching, wreathed in darkness and flame that consumed everything nearby. He stood taller than the tallest elf, with a form that constantly shifted between shadow and substance, making him difficult to strike even for those brave enough to face him. His whip could extend to impossible lengths, binding victims from great distances, while his axe was said to have been forged in the heart of Angband from metals that existed nowhere else in Arda. During the fall of Gondolin, Gothmog led the final assault, breaking through gates that had stood for centuries and bringing down the hidden city that was considered impregnable. In that battle, he met his end at the hands of Ecthelion of the Fountain, who drove his spike-helmeted head into Gothmog's body as they both fell into the Fountain of the King, where the waters extinguished the Balrogs' flames forever. The mutual destruction of Gothmog and Ecthelion became legendary, as it took one of the greatest elf lords sacrificing himself to destroy Morgoth's most terrible captain. His death marked a turning point in Morgoth's power, as no other Balrog ever arose to take his place as High Captain, and the organization of Angband's forces never recovered the same strategic cohesion. Fëanor was the mightiest of all the children of Ilúvatar in craft, lore, and native power, surpassing every elf who came before or after him. His mother Miriel gave so much of her strength to his creation that she died of weariness after his birth, making him unique among all elves as one whose birth demanded such sacrifice. He created the Silmarils, the greatest works ever crafted by any incarnate being, capturing the light of the two trees in imperishable crystals that even the Valar marveled at, and Morgoth lusted after above all treasures. His skill extended beyond jewelcraft to include the invention of the Tengwar script, improvements to the Serati of Rúmil, and countless other works of art and knowledge that advanced Elvish civilization immeasurably. The Palantiri, the seeing stones that would later prove crucial in Middle-earth's history, were quite possibly his creation, demonstrating his ability to imbue crystal with powers of sight that transcended space and time. His spirit burned so fiercely that his body could barely contain it, giving him energy and passion that made other elves seem dim by comparison, driving him to achievements in decades that others could not accomplish in millennia. When he drew his sword against Fingolfin, the Valar themselves intervened through Manwë's herald, showing that his wrath was considered dangerous enough to warrant divine intervention. During the flight of the Noldor, he led his people through the Helcaraxes' grinding ice despite the doom of Mandos, his will alone keeping thousands moving through conditions that should have destroyed them. In his final battle, he fought multiple Balrogs simultaneously for days, killing several before Gothmog arrived with reinforcements, a feat unmatched by any other elf in history. His death was unlike any other, as his spirit burned so hot that it reduced his body to ash instantly, and Mandos confirmed he would never be reincarnated while Arda endured. sword, keeping him in the halls until the end of time. The oath of Fëanor that he swore with his sons became a force of destiny itself, driving events throughout the First Age and causing more tragedy than any other words ever spoken. Even the Valar could not unmake what Fëanor had wrought, as the Silmarils remained beyond their power to recreate or destroy, marking him as a creator whose works transcended even divine ability to replicate. Glorfindel was among the most powerful elves to ever exist, unique in being the only known elf to return from death with enhanced power comparable to a Maya. In his first life, he was a lord of Gondolin and chief of the House of the Golden Flower, already mighty enough to stand against demons of shadow and flame. During the fall of Gondolin, he fought a Balrog in single combat on the narrow mountain pass of Cirith-Thorenath, killing the demon but falling to his death, sacrificing himself to save the refugees, including Arundel's parents. His sacrifice was deemed so noble that Mandos released his spirit after a brief time, and the Valar not only restored his body but enhanced his native power to near Maya levels. When he returned to Middle-earth in the Second Age, he brought with him authority from Valinor itself, making him one of the few beings Sauron genuinely feared to face directly. His spiritual power was so great that he existed simultaneously in both the seen and unseen worlds, appearing to Frodo's eyes at the Ford of Bruin as a figure of white light that drove back the Nazgûl. The Witch King of Angmar, Lord of the Nine, fled rather than face Glorfindel in single combat at the Battle of Fornost, recognizing an enemy who could destroy him permanently. His prophecy that not by the hand of man will he fall demonstrated foresight granted by his time in Valinor, seeing centuries into the future with clarity that exceeded even Elrond's wisdom. During the Third Age, he could ride openly against all 9 Nazgûl together, his presence alone enough to scatter them, as beings of shadow could not endure the light that emanated from his enhanced spirit. His horse Asphaloth was likewise touched by his power, running faster than any normal steed and showing no fear of the ring-wraiths that terrified all other animals. The authority he carried from the Valar made him effectively their representative in Middle-earth, similar to the Istari but without their limitations, retaining full memory and power from his time in the Blessed Realm. Even Gandalf deferred to Glorfindel's judgment in matters of spiritual danger, recognizing him as an equal or possibly superior in pure power, though Gandalf held greater responsibility for Middle-earth's fate. Elrond Half-elven was master of Rivendell and one of the mightiest and wisest beings remaining in Middle-earth during the Third Age, bearing the ring Vilya, mightiest of the 3. His heritage combined all the great lines of elves and men, being descended from Thingol and Melian, Turgon, Fëanor's line through marriage, and the houses of Hador and Haleth, giving him a nobility that exceeded kings. He had lived through 3 ages of the world, witnessing the fall of Beleriand, the defeat of Sauron, and the decline of both elves and men, accumulating wisdom that spans 6,000 years. Vilya, the Ring of Air, granted him power over healing and preservation, allowing him to maintain Rivendell as a sanctuary where time seemed slowed and evil could not enter unless he willed it. His healing abilities surpassed all others in Middle-earth, able to cure wounds both physical and spiritual that would defeat lesser healers, including the Morgul wound that nearly destroyed Frodo. As Herald of Gil-galad, he stood with the High King at the siege of Barad-dûr and witnessed Sauron's defeat, being one of only 2 survivors who entered Mount Doom with Isildur. His lore mastery encompassed languages both living and dead, histories forgotten by others, and understanding of the music of creation that gave him insight into the patterns of fate. The Council of Elrond demonstrated his ability to guide disparate peoples toward common purpose, using wisdom rather than force to unite representatives of all free races. His foresight, inherited from his ancestor Melian the Maya, allowed him to perceive possible futures and guide others along paths that led to hope rather than despair. During the Third Age, he commanded respect from all, including wizards, kings, and even the Ents, who recognized him as one of the few who remembered the Elder Days as they did. The power he wielded through Vilya was subtle but profound, maintaining the last homely house as a center of resistance against Sauron for thousands of years without ever raising a sword. His choice to remain as elf-kind rather than choosing mortality like his brother Elros meant he carried the burden of watching ages pass and loved ones fade, granting him understanding of both loss and endurance that informed his counsel. Gandalf the White was the enhanced form of the Maya Olorin after his resurrection by Ilúvatar himself, returning with power and authority that exceeded his previous Grey incarnation exponentially. As Olorin, he had dwelt with Nienna learning pity and patience, with Manwë gaining wisdom, and with Varda understanding light, making him uniquely prepared among the Istari for his mission. His resurrection came with removal of the limitations placed on the Istari, allowing him to access more of his true Maya nature while remaining in physical form. He could now break Saruman's staff with a word, cast out possessing spirits like he did with Theoden, and command light that could pierce any darkness or deception. His confrontation with the Witch King at Minas Tirith showed him standing as the sole defender of the gate, his power alone preventing the Lord of the Nazgul from entering until the Rohirrim arrived. The flame of Anor he wielded was not mere fire, but the secret fire of creation itself, the same power Ilúvatar used to give life to the world, making him a literal servant of the Creator's will. During the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, his presence alone could rally broken armies and restore hope to the desperate, his staff shining with light that strengthened good and weakened evil. He demonstrated ability to perceive events across vast distances, knowing of Frodo's progress despite hundreds of miles of separation, showing his consciousness operated beyond normal physical limitations. His true form, glimpsed briefly by Gimli and Fangorn, was described as a radiant being of white light wrapped in mortal flesh, revealing his angelic nature barely contained. Against the Balrog of Moria, he fought for 10 days straight, from the depths of the earth to the peak of Xaroxagil, finally destroying a being of similar Maya origin through superior will and purpose. The enhancement of his power included authority over other Istari, as demonstrated when he expelled Saruman from the Order and broke his connection to their mission. His wisdom now encompassed not just knowledge but direct divine guidance, knowing exactly what must be done to achieve victory even when the path seemed impossible. The transformation from grey to white involved more than just increased power, as Gandalf's very essence was restructured by Ilúvatar to serve as a direct intervention in the affairs of Middle-earth. His memory of his time as Gandalf the Grey was initially fragmented, requiring conscious effort to recall his former name and relationships, showing the profound nature of his resurrection. The white robes he wore weren't merely symbolic, but were woven from light itself, providing protection against both physical and spiritual attacks that would have destroyed his previous form. His new staff was carved from a fragment of the Two Trees wood preserved in Valinor, making it a conduit for the ancient light that preceded the sun and moon. When he exorcised Saruman from Theoden, he didn't simply break an enchantment, but literally pulled Saruman's spirit through space, forcing a confrontation across hundreds of miles. His ability to call Shadowfax Lord of all Horses demonstrated dominion over the animal kingdom that exceeded even Radagast's connection to beasts. The prophecies he spoke weren't predictions but certainties, as his enhanced connection to Ilúvatar allowed him to see the threads of fate as they were woven. During his return to the Fellowship, the light that emanated from him was so intense that Legolas initially believed he was seeing a vision rather than a physical being. His confrontation with the mouth of Sauron showed his ability to pierce through lies and illusions instantly, seeing truth even when it was wrapped in layers of deception. The power he wielded at the Black Gate wasn't primarily martial but spiritual, his presence preventing the assembled forces of good from being overwhelmed by the despair that Sauron projected. His understanding of the ring's nature was complete, knowing not just its powers but the exact moment it would be destroyed, timing his actions to coincide with that predetermined instant. Radagast the Brown was one of the 5 Astari sent to Middle-earth, a Maya of Yavanna who retained his deep connection to nature and all living creatures. His power specialized in communion with animals and growing things, able to speak with birds, beasts, and even the trees themselves in their own languages. He could call upon the aid of any creature within miles of his presence, from the smallest insect to the great eagles, all of whom recognized him as a friend and protector. His home at Rhosgobel served as a sanctuary for injured and threatened animals, where he used forgotten arts of healing that could restore creatures others considered beyond help. The browns and greens of his robes were not merely color but represented his integration with the natural world, allowing him to move through forests undetected by any who meant harm to the wood. His staff carried the power of growth and renewal, able to accelerate plant growth, purify corrupted water, and restore balance to ecosystems damaged by evil. Unlike Gandalf, who walked among men and elves, Radagast found his purpose among the beasts and birds, learning secrets of the world that civilized folk had forgotten. His knowledge of herbs and natural remedies exceeded even Elrond's in certain areas, understanding properties of plants that grew in the deepest forests where others never ventured. During the Third Age, he maintained watch over Mirkwood, monitoring the growing shadow and sending reports through his bird friends to those who needed warning. His seeming failure in the eyes of some was actually dedication to a different aspect of the mission, preserving the natural world that others forgot in their focus on kingdoms and powers. The rabbit sled he fashioned demonstrated his unconventional methods were simply different approaches to the same fight against darkness, using nature's own systems rather than swords and spells. His greatest feat was maintaining networks of animal spies that covered thousands of square miles, providing intelligence that even Saruman's Palantir could not match. The corruption of Saruman pained him deeply, as they had been brothers in purpose, but Radagast remained true to his mission while the White fell to pride and power. Beorn was the last known skin-changer in Middle-earth, possessing the unique ability to transform between man and giant bear at will, a power that predated the rings and wizardry. In his man form, he stood taller and broader than any normal human, with strength enough to lift ponies with one hand and snap iron chains like thread. As a bear, he grew to tremendous size, larger than any natural bear, with claws that could tear through armor, and jaws that could crush helmets with the head still inside them. His origin remained mysterious even to himself, possibly descended from the first men or perhaps something older, connected to the ancient days when such transformations were less rare. During the Battle of Five Armies, he arrived in bear form at the climax, scattering bodyguards of bolg-like leaves and crushing the goblin leader himself, turning the tide of battle single-handedly. His senses in both forms exceeded normal limitations, able to smell orc pack movements from miles away and hear conversations that others would consider impossible distances. The protection he offered at his house was absolute, as no evil creature dared approach his lands, knowing that the bear man's wrath was death without exception or mercy. He commanded the loyalty of animals throughout the Anduin Valley, with horses, dogs, and even wild creatures serving him voluntarily out of respect rather than fear. His knowledge of the northern lands exceeded that of maps or scouts, knowing every path, stream, and hidden valley from the Misty Mountains to Mirkwood's western edges. The mead he brewed had properties beyond normal drink, granting exceptional vitality and clear thinking to those who consumed it, suggesting his abilities extended to herb lore and subtle magics. His house itself seemed to respond to his will, with animals performing complex tasks without verbal commands, maintaining gardens and preparing meals through some communion beyond speech. In battle rage as a bear, he became unstoppable, shrugging off arrow wounds that would fell a normal beast and fighting with intelligence that made him deadlier than any animal. Despite his power, he lived simply, refusing kingship or leadership beyond his own lands, content to guard the passages between mountain and forest. His descendants, the Boromings, inherited some measure of his abilities, though none matched the original Skin-changer's full power of transformation. Durin the Deathless was the eldest and greatest of the seven fathers of the dwarves, created directly by Allblay the Smith before the awakening of the elves, making him older than any other speaking being save the Ents. He alone among the fathers awoke without companion at Mount Gundabad, gazing into Cael Zaram, where he saw a crown of stars reflected above his head, marking his divine destiny. His life spanned so many ages that other races believed him immortal, giving rise to his title Deathless, though he eventually passed like all mortal beings must. The wisdom and craft he possessed came directly from Als's teaching in the timeless period before his sleep, giving him knowledge of metal and stone that exceeded even later dwarf smiths. He founded Khazad-dûm, the greatest of all dwarf cities, discovering the mithril veins that would make it the wonder of the northern world for thousands of years. His mere presence could inspire dwarves to feats of craftsmanship they could never achieve again, as if his spirit carried some remnant of Alsa's own creative power. The Durin's folk believed he would return 7 times, reborn as his own descendant with full memories of his past lives, making him functionally immortal through reincarnation. Each return of Durin brought a golden age to the dwarves, with crafts and victories that exceeded the generations between his appearances. The doors, halls, and deepest chambers of Khazad-dûm bore his personal touch, with engineering so perfect that they operated flawlessly for millennia without maintenance. His understanding of the music of creation, learned from Alla who participated in it, allowed him to craft items that harmonized with the fundamental forces of Arda. The throne of Khazad-dûm was carved by his own hands from a single block of black stone, with properties that allowed it to endure any catastrophe that might befall the mountain. His crown, the first crown of the dwarves, contained powers of kingship that legitimized rule, and only those of his direct line could wear it without consequence. The 7 rings given to the dwarf lords were distributed according to patterns he established, showing his influence extended beyond death to shape future events. Even the Balrog that eventually destroyed Khazad-dûm avoided the deepest halls Durin had personally consecrated, showing that his power left permanent marks on the stone itself. His axe, passed down through generations, never dulled and always struck true, carrying something of his will within the metal that All-Lee had helped forge. The wisdom he encoded in the first Khazdul runes contained layers of meaning that later dwarves could study for centuries without exhausting their secrets. During his first life, Durin walked Middle-earth for so long that he witnessed the rising and setting of countless mortal kingdoms, learning their crafts and teaching them stonework in return. The great roads that connected the dwarf cities were laid according to his design, following lines of power in the earth that only he could perceive, making travel between the kingdoms swifter and safer than any surface road. His relationship with the Ents predated any other alliance between speaking peoples, as both races remembered the world before the sun and moon, giving them a unique understanding of time's passage. The wealth he accumulated wasn't merely gold and gems, but knowledge of every vein and deposit in the northern mountains, information he encoded in maps that could only be read by those who knew the secret keys of interpretation. When dragons first appeared in the world, Durin was among the few who understood their nature, having learned from Olli about the corruption Morgoth would bring to Arda's creatures. His forges developed the first weapons specifically designed to pierce dragon scale, techniques that would be refined but never truly surpassed by later smiths.